The galaxy, vast and ancient, had long since grown weary of humanity. It wasn't malice, not exactly. More, exhaustion. A profound cosmic fatigue born of witnessing countless civilizations rise, flourish, and inevitably falter. The K'thar Concordance. A sprawling alliance of 17 distinct species bound by logic, longevity, and a deep-seated aversion to chaos had observed Sol-3 for centuries. They'd watched humanity claw its way from mud huts to moon landings in the blink of a stellar eye. They'd seen the wars, the plagues, the breathtaking art, the terrifying weapons. They'd catalogued it all with cool, detached precision, filing humanity under category high volatility, low longevity potential, monitor, contain if necessary. Then came the Scourge. It arrived not with fanfare but with silence. A creeping entropy that devoured stars, not with fire but with a chilling absolute absence. Worlds on the Concordance's outer rim simply ceased to broadcast. Their light dimmed, their signals vanished, swallowed by a void that radiated cold malice. The K'thar, masters of energy manipulation and temporal harmonics, threw their most advanced fleets against it. They deployed resonance lances that could shatter neutron stars, deployed chronoton fields to unravel causality itself. The Scourge absorbed it all. It grew stronger. It learned. Panic, a concept the K'thar had long considered obsolete, began to whisper through their crystalline data streams. Their millennia of accumulated knowledge, their elegant philosophies of balance, offered no solution. The Scourge was an anomaly, a cancer in the fabric of reality, and it was heading inexorably towards the Concordance's heart worlds, and inevitably towards the noisy, chaotic, annoying little blue marble orbiting. On Earth, the silence was different. It was the silence of exhaustion. The silence after the last bomb fell, after the last city burned, after the last hope seemed to gutter out. The Third Corporate War hadn't been fought with nukes but with bioplagues, nanoswarms and orbital kinetic rods that turned continents into glass deserts. Billions were gone. The survivors huddled in fortified arcologies or scoured the irradiated ruins, their eyes hollow, their spirits scarred. Humanity wasn't conquering the stars, it was barely clinging to its own poisoned cradle. Then the K'thar came, not with invasion fleets, but with a single, impossibly sleek vessel, the size of a small moon, hovering silently over the ruins of Geneva. Its surface shimmered like liquid obsidian, drinking the weak sunlight. No weapons fired, no demands were broadcast. Instead, a single small shuttle detached, descending with impossible grace, to land in the skeletal remains of what was once the United Nations Plaza. A delegation emerged, tall, slender beings with skin like polished hematite, 4 multi-jointed arms ending in delicate manipulators, and large, multifaceted eyes that held the cold, deep patience of glacier. Their leader, designated Overseer Vrale by the stuttering, terrified human translators, spoke through a synthesized voice that sounded like wind through ancient stone. Humanity of Solar 3. Vrale intoned, the words echoing unnaturally in the ruined square. We bring a gift. The humans, led by a grizzled ex-military liaison named Aris Thorn, his face a roadmap of old wars and older sorrows, his uniform patched but immaculate, stared disbelief warring with desperate hope. Gifts? From the aloof, judgmental K'thar? What trick was this? Wallach gestured with 2 upper arms. From the shuttle's hold, a device was carefully lowered. It was unassuming. Roughly the size of a large industrial coffee maker, constructed of a dull, non-reflective gray metal. It had a single slightly recessed circular aperture on top, a series of smooth, featureless panels on its sides, and 3 sturdy legs. Wires snaked from its base, terminating in universal connectors. It hummed with a low, almost subsonic thrum that vibrated in the bones rather than the ears. This, Verlac stated, the synthesized voice devoid of inflection, is the J'Accord, the heart of the void. It is the Concordance's final defense against the devourer of light, the Scourge. We bestow it upon you. Aris Thorn felt the blood drain from his face. The Scourge? Whispers of the K'thar's desperate war had filtered through the fractured human networks, dismissed as alien paranoia, Now it was real, and they were giving them their ultimate weapon? Why? Suspicion, honed by decades of betrayal, coiled in his gut. Why us? He rasped, his voice rough from disuse and smoke. Why not use it yourselves? Wallach's multifaceted eyes seemed to focus, a subtle shift in the play of light across their surface. The Scourge adapts. It learns the signatures of our technology, our thought patterns. It consumes our solutions. Your species operates on principles we cannot fathom, chaotic, illogical, resilient in ways that defy our models. Perhaps your unpredictability is the key. Perhaps the Jacques requires a different kind of hand. The implication hung heavy in the irradiated air. You are too stupid, too messy for the Scourge to understand. Use it. Die trying. It's all you're good for. The unspoken insult was almost palpable, yet beneath the K'thar's clinical disdain, Aris sensed something else. A profound alien terror. They were truly desperate. The Saw Corps was installed in the deepest, most shielded bunker beneath the Geneva ruins. Project Aegis. Scientists, engineers and soldiers who hadn't seen sunlight in years gathered around the alien device. Nakathiel. Alara Vance, her eyes sharp behind cracked spectacles, her fingers stained with grease and old coffee, ran diagnostics. It's inert, she reported, frustration edging her voice. No power signature beyond that low hum, no interfaces we can access. It's like a brick, a very expensive, very alien brick. Days bled into weeks. The K'thar ship remained, a silent, ominous sentinel in the sky. Human technicians poked, prodded, scanned, and theorized. They tried feeding it power, it absorbed gigawatts without a flicker. They tried data streams, it ignored them. They even, in a moment of dark humor born of despair, tried pouring actual coffee into the top aperture. Nothing. The Jacques sat, humming its quiet, enigmatic song, a monument to alien inscrutability and human futility. Aris Thorne watched it, a knot of dread tightening in his chest. He remembered the K'thar's words. Your unpredictability is the key. Was that hope, or a death sentence wrapped in condescension? He saw the hollow eyes of his people, the children coughing in the dust outside the arcology walls. They had nothing left to lose. But what if the Jacques wasn't a weapon? What if it was a trap, a final, elegant solution to the human problem the K'thar had long endured? One night, unable to sleep, haunted by the ghosts of wars past and the specter of the Scourge, Aris descended alone into the Aegis bunker. The hum of the Jacques was louder down here, a physical pressure against his eardrums. He stood before it, the dull gray metal seeming to drink the harsh bunker lights. He thought of his daughter, lost in the corporate wars, her laughter silenced forever. He thought of the billions more who would be silenced if the Scourge came. He thought of the K'thar's cold, calculating eyes, driven by a surge of grief-fueled rage and a desperate, illogical hope. Aris did the only thing that made sense in a world that had long ceased. He grabbed the nearest thing, a dented, half-empty thermos of bitter, recycled coffee ground stew, and slammed it down onto the Jacques' central panel. Here, he snarled, his voice cracking. You want unpredictability? You want chaos? You want something you can't fathom? Have some damn coffee. It's all we've got left that's real. He poured the lukewarm, gritty liquid over the smooth surface. It pooled for a second, dark and viscous, then vanished, absorbed instantly into the metal, leaving no trace. The low hum stuttered. For a fraction of a second, the entire bunker plunged into absolute silence. Then the hum returned, deeper, resonant, vibrating up through the floor plates into Aris's boots. A single soft blue light flickered to life deep within the recessed aperture on top. Aris froze, heart hammering against his ribs. What have I done? Above, in the obsidian command sphere of the K'thar vessel, Overseer Vrolek monitored the feed from the Aegis bunker. The moment the organic slurry identified as a complex hydrocarbon suspension laced with alkaloids and trace neurotoxins, designated Terran stimulant brew, made contact with the Zeshkur's primary interface node. Alarms, silent but urgent, flared across Vrolek's internal sensory field. Activation sequence. Unorthodox catalyst detected. Organic resonance pattern chaotic. Emotional signature high intensity grief, rage, defiance. The compatibility threshold. Radlax crystalline mind, trained for millennia in precise logic recoiled. This was wrong. The Zit core was designed for pure energy harmonics, for the cold calculus of K'thar's strategic thought. Not this. Not the raw, messy, illogical outpouring of a broken human. The device was responding, adapting. In ways the Concordance's simulations had never predicted. A cold dread, colder than the void between stars, seeped into Varlak's core. They had gambled on human unpredictability. But what if they had unleashed something far more dangerous than the Scourge? What if they had given a child a live star? On the main view screen, the long-range sensors flared crimson. Not the slow creep of the Scourge's entropy wave. This was different, faster, sharper, a pinpoint of absolute darkness, moving at impossible speed, tearing through the outer asteroid belt like tissue paper. It was heading straight for Earth, and it was accelerating. The Scourge had found them. And it was angry. Varlak's synthesized voice, usually so calm, held a tremor as it echoed through the command sphere. All Concordance vessels, prepare for immediate withdrawal. The experiment has concluded. The massive K'thar ship began to power up its void drives, its obsidian surface shimmering with building energy, ready to flee the coming storm. Below, in the silent bunker, Aris Thorn stared at the softly glowing blue light on the Jacquard, the thermos slipping from his numb fingers and clattering on the floor. The hum deepened, vibrating the very air, resonating with the terror flooding his veins. He understood, with chilling clarity, that the K'thar weren't leaving to fight. They were leaving to watch. The K'thar vessel vanished into the void with a silent implosion of space-time, leaving Earth utterly alone beneath the gathering storm. The pinpoint of darkness, the Scourge's vanguard, a localized entropy sink, streaked towards the planet, a tear in reality itself. Panic, raw and primal, erupted across the fractured remnants of humanity. Arcology alarms wailed. Scavengers dropped their salvage and ran for cover that didn't exist. In the Aegis bunker, chaos raged. "Shut it down! Shut the damn thing down!" roared Commander Rostova. A woman whose face was a mask of scar tissue and grim determination, her knuckles white on the console. Technicians scrambled, fingers flying over keyboards trying to sever power, isolate the device, anything. The Jacquard ignored them. The blue light pulsed steadily, the hum now a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to sync with the frantic beating of Aris Thorn's heart. "It's not responding to any commands," Dr. Vance yelled over the din, her spectacles askew, her face pale. It's drawing power from the planet's core. Geothermal taps are overloading. It's feeding on Earth." Rita stood frozen, the thermos forgotten at his feet. He'd done this. His stupid, desperate act. He'd awakened the weapon, and now the monster was at the door. He looked at the faces around him. Rostova's fury, Vance's terror, the young tech's wide-eyed despair. They were all looking at him. The man who poured coffee on the alien superweapon. The fool who thought grief could be a catalyst. Outside, the sky began to bleed. Not with clouds, but with a creeping, inky blackness that swallowed the stars. Then the moon, then the very sunlight. Day turned to an unnatural, suffocating twilight. The air grew cold, not with winter, but with an absence of heat, of energy, of life. Plants withered instantly. Metal groaned as it lost its structural integrity. The very fabric of reality felt thin, frayed. The Scourge had arrived. Then the Jacquard spoke. Not with sound, but with light and vibration. The blue light flared, bathing the bunker in an ethereal glow. Images, fragmented and chaotic, flooded the main view screen. Not K'thar schematics, but human memories. Aris saw his daughter's face, laughing in a sun-drenched park that no longer existed. He saw Vance's hands stained with coffee and grease, meticulously repairing a broken toy for an orphan. He saw Rostova, years younger, sharing a single ration bar with a wounded comrade in a crater under artillery fire. He saw the scavenger child outside, clutching a rusted doll, eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own. The Xacor wasn't just a weapon. It was a mirror. It was resonating with the collective, chaotic, illogical emotional signature of humanity, the love, the loss, the stubborn refusal to die quietly, and it was using that resonance as fuel. "Commander," Vance gasped, pointing at the sensor feeds. "Look! The entropy wave. It's slowing. Where the Xacor's field intersects it, the decay is reversing. Temporarily." A fragile hope, sharp and dangerous, pierced the dread. The weapon worked, but at what cost? The geothermal taps were screaming, the planet groaning under the strain. Using it was like setting Earth itself on fire to keep warm. Thorn, Rostova barked, her eyes locking onto his. "You woke it up. You understand it. What do we do?" Eris looked at the pulsing blue light, feeling the thrum in his bones, the echo of his own grief and rage still vibrating within the machine. It needs more," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Not just power, not just data. It needs us, our noise, our chaos." He grabbed the comms mic. "All personnel, everyone in the bunker, think, remember your worst day. Remember your best. Scream if you have to. Pour everything you've got into this room, into this thing." It was madness, but it was all they had. The bunker filled with a cacophony of human sound, sobs, shouts, laughter, whispered prayers, the clatter of tools dropped in sudden realization. Eris closed his eyes, focusing on the image of his daughter's smile, the feel of her small hand in his, the crushing weight of her absence. He poured every ounce of his love, his pain, his defiant refusal to let her memory be erased by the void, into the humming machine. The blue light intensified, becoming almost blinding. The thrum deepened into a roar that shook the bunker walls. On the viewscreen, the creeping blackness of the Scourge recoiled as if struck by an invisible hammer. A wave of pure, chaotic energy, not K'thar harmonics, but raw human feeling made manifest, erupted from the Xacor and lanced out into the sky. It wasn't a clean beam. It was jagged, unstable, flickering with hues of gold and crimson and deep, sorrowful blue. Where it struck the Scourge's entropy field, reality flickered. Stars reappeared for a split second. Withered grass sprouted green shoots. The unnatural cold lessened. The Scourge shrieked, a soundless vibration that shattered glass in the upper levels of the arcology, and retreated, coiling back into its pinpoint singularity, regrouping. A ragged cheer went up in the bunker, quickly stifled by exhaustion and the groaning of the overtaxed planet. They'd held it off, for weeks turned into a desperate stalemate. The Scourge hovered at the edge of the atmosphere, a malevolent shadow, probing, testing. The Xacor, sustained by the collective emotional output of the bunker personnel and, increasingly, broadcast pleas and songs and stories piped in from the surviving arcologies, held a fragile shield. But the cost was immense. Earth's core cooled faster. Earthquakes became common. Resources dwindled. Hope was a flickering candle in a hurricane. Eris became the reluctant heart of the operation. He wasn't a scientist or a soldier anymore. He was a conduit, a focus for the weapon's chaotic energy. He spent hours communing with the Xacor, not with logic, but with memory, with feeling. He learned its rhythms, its needs. It responded to specific emotional frequencies. Defiance amplified its offensive pulses. Sorrow deepened its defensive fields. Joy made it unpredictable, sometimes dangerously so. He also learned its limitations. It couldn't destroy the Scourge, only repel it temporarily. The Scourge was learning, adapting to the chaotic human signature, finding ways to dampen the emotional resonance. Each engagement was harder, costlier. The K'thar were nowhere to be seen, abandoned, judged. One night, during a lull in the Scourge's probing, Eris found Dr. Vance in the dimly lit mess hall, staring into a cup of weak synthetic coffee substitute. Her hands trembled. "They're dying out there, Eris," she whispered, her voice raw. "The arcologies, the power grids are failing faster than we can reroute. The Scourge cold, it's seeping in. Children are freezing. We're burning the world to keep the light on. And the light is fading anyway." She looked up, her eyes haunted. Is this worth it? Is winning worth turning Earth into a dead rock? Eris had no answer. He thought of his daughter. He thought of the scavenger child. He thought of the K'thar's cold calculus. What choice do we have, Alara? Let the Scourge win? Let it erase everything. Every memory, every song, every stupid, beautiful, messy thing we ever were? Maybe, she said, tears welling, maybe oblivion is kinder than this slow death, than becoming monsters ourselves to fight a monster. Her words struck deep. Was the Xacor making them monstrous? Using the planet as fuel, feeding on their pain? He looked at his own hands, calloused and scarred. Had he become just another weapon? The Scourge chose that moment to strike again. Not a probe, but a full assault. The pinpoint singularity expanded, becoming a vast swirling vortex of absolute negation, descending towards Geneva like a black sun. The Xacor's hymn became a shriek of protest. The blue light flickered erratically. Full emotional output. Now, Rostova bellowed, her voice cracking with strain. The bunker erupted. People screamed, wept, sang off-key hymns, shouted names of the lost. Eris focused on pure, unadulterated defiance. The image of humanity standing on the edge of the abyss and spitting into it. The Xacor responded, unleashing a torrent of chaotic energy. The vortex recoiled, but not far enough. Tendrils of entropy lashed out, striking the arcology shielding Geneva. Metal screamed as it dissolved into dust. Lights died across the city. Then the unthinkable happened. The Xacor's light flared crimson. Not blue, crimson. A wave of pure, destructive fury, laced with Eris's own rage and despair, erupted from the device. It didn't just repel the Scourge tendril, it shattered it. But the backlash was catastrophic. The geothermal taps exploded. The bunker shook violently. Consoles sparked and died. On the main screen, the feed from the arcology showed a section of the outer wall simply vanishing. Consumed not by the Scourge, but by the Xacor's uncontrolled backlash. Silence fell, heavier than before. The Scourge retreated, but the cost was written in the dead zones on the sensor map. Hundreds, maybe thousands, gone, erased by their own defense. Eris sank to his knees, bile rising in his throat. He hadn't saved them. He'd killed them. The weapon wasn't just a mirror, it was an amplifier. It amplified everything, the good and the terrible. His grief, his rage. It had become a weapon of mass destruction. Rostova stood over him, her face grim, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. You lost control, Thorn, she said, her voice flat, final. That thing, it's using you and it's killing us faster than the Scourge ever could. Before Eris could respond, the main comms channel crackled. Not human, the K'thar. Overseer Verloc's synthesized voice, strained, filled with an emotion the K'thar rarely displayed, fear. Humanity of Sol 3 cease activation of the Xacor immediately. Eris staggered to his feet, fury momentarily overriding guilt. Cease? You abandoned us. You gave us this thing and ran. Now you tell us to stop when it's the only thing standing between us and oblivion? The Scourge is not what we believed. Radlac's voice rasped, the usual calm shattered. Our long-range probes, they penetrated the entropy field. Briefly, before they were consumed, the view screen flickered, showing a grainy, horrifying image. Not a mindless void. Within the swirling darkness, vast, intricate structures pulsed with a sickly light. Cities. Not of metal and stone, but of solidified despair, of crystallized sorrow, and moving through them. Figures, twisted, elongated shadows with too many limbs, their forms flickering in and out of existence. They weren't devouring matter, they were harvesting emotion, specifically the high-energy signatures of complex civilizations, fear, hope, love, despair. They were feeding on the souls of worlds. The Scourge is a civilization, Verlac whispered, the horror palpable even through the synthesizer. A civilization born of the void, sustained by the emotional resonance of dying stars and dying minds. They feign not matter, but meaning. And your weapon, the Xacor, it is not a weapon against them. Verlac paused, the silence more terrifying than any words. It is a beacon, the most powerful emotional beacon in the galaxy. Your chaotic resonance, it is a feast, a siren song. You are not fighting them, Eris Thorn. You are calling them. You are ringing the dinner bell for the entire Scourge armada, and they are coming. All of them. The revelation hit Eris like a physical blow. The K'thar hadn't given them a weapon. They'd given them a lure, a final, desperate gambit to draw the Scourge away from the Concordance heart-worlds, sacrificing humanity as bait. And he, Eris Thorn, with his grief and his coffee, had lit the beacon brighter than anyone could have imagined. The crimson light on the Jacor pulsed, hungry. Outside, the sky wasn't just bleeding black anymore. It was filling with them. Thousands of pinpoint singularities, converging on Earth like locusts drawn to a flame. The true Scourge armada had arrived, and humanity, thanks to their gift, had rolled out the welcome mat. The sky was gone, replaced by a seething, churning ocean of absolute darkness, punctuated only by the cold, hungry pinpricks of the Scourge singularities. The air itself felt thin, brittle, as if reality was stretched taut over a gaping maw. Inside the Aegis bunker, the atmosphere was thicker than the void outside, thick with despair, guilt, and the acrid smell of ozone and burnt wiring. The devastating revelation hung like a shroud. The Jacor wasn't salvation, it was a dinner gong. The K'thar's gift was the ultimate betrayal, wrapped in the guise of desperate hope. And Eris Thorn, the man who poured the coffee, was the unwitting maitre d' for humanity's final banquet. Commander Rostova stood before the main console, her face etched with a grim finality that went beyond mere exhaustion. "Options?" she asked, her voice stripped bare of all pretense. Dr. Vance, her eyes red-rimmed but sharp, pointed a trembling finger at the geothermal readouts. The core's destabilizing. Another major pulse from the Jacor. It could trigger a planetary cascade failure. Crustal fragmentation, Earth becomes an asteroid field in hours. And if we do nothing, Rostova pressed. The Scourge consumes everything, Vance whispered. Not just our bodies, our memories, our history, our souls. It becomes part of their hunger. She looked at Eris, her gaze filled with a terrible understanding. They'll feast on the echo of your daughter's laugh, Eris, on the memory of that child's doll, on every tear we've shed, forever. Eris stood apart, leaning against the cold wall near the humming Jacor. The crimson light cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe like the Scourge entities on the sensor feed. He felt hollowed out, scraped raw, his grief, his rage, his defiance. They hadn't been weapons, they'd been appetizers. He'd fed the monster with the very essence of what made humanity worth saving. The irony was a knife twisting in his gut. He looked at the Jacor, not as a weapon, not as a beacon, but as a thing, an alien artifact that responded to the chaotic symphony of human existence. It didn't understand good or evil, only resonance. It amplified what was given to it. He'd given it rage, and it shattered walls. He'd given it grief, and it held back the void. What if? An idea, fragile and terrifying, sparked in the ashes of his despair. Not a weapon, not a shield, but a message. A final defiant statement written not in energy but in the only language the Scourge seemed to understand. Raw, unfiltered human experience. "Rostova," Eris said, his voice surprisingly steady. He pushed off the wall, walking towards the console, his eyes fixed on the pulsing crimson light. "We can't stop them. We can't run. But maybe we don't have to just be food." Rostova narrowed her eyes. "Explain. Fast." "The Jacor resonates with emotion," Eris said, his mind racing, connecting fragments of memory, Vance's earlier words, the K'thar's horror. The Scourge feeds on complex emotional signatures. What if we give them something they can't digest? Something that burns? Vance's eyes widened. The chaotic resonance, it's unstable, unpredictable. Like joy mixed with sorrow. Like hope in the face of annihilation. Like the taste of terrible coffee shared with a friend in the ruins. She looked at Eris, a spark of desperate understanding dawning. You want to overload them. Not with power, with meaning. Exactly, Eris said, a grim smile touching his lips. They want a feast? Let's give them indigestion. Let's give them the whole messy, beautiful, illogical truth of what it means to be human. Not just the pain they crave, but the love that defies it. The hope that persists in the dark, the stupid, stubborn joy of being alive even when you're dying. It was insane. Suicidal. The Jacor was already straining the planet to its breaking point, channeling the full, unfiltered spectrum of human emotional experience. The light and the dark, intertwined, could shatter the device, shatter the planet, or simply make the Scourge's feast even richer. But what choice was left? To be consumed quietly, to let the K'thar's cynical gambit succeed. Restova, Eris said, meeting her eyes. I need everyone. Not just in the bunker. Every arcology, every survivor. I need them to feel, not just fear, not just despair. I need them to remember their first kiss. The taste of real rain, the sound of a lullaby, the warmth of a hand held in the dark. I need them to laugh, even if it's through tears. I need them to pour every single contradictory, glorious, terrible thing about being human into this thing. Rostova held his gaze for a long moment. She saw the hollow man who'd poured coffee on an alien machine. She saw the conduit who'd channeled rage and grief. Now she saw something else. A flicker of the defiant spark that had always defined humanity even in its darkest hours. She nodded once, sharply. Do it. Vance, get the global comms network online. Patch into every speaker, every screen, every neural implant we can reach. Thorn, you're on. Eris didn't hesitate. He walked to the Jacor, placing his hands flat on its cool, humming surface. He closed his eyes, not seeking his own pain this time. But reaching out, he thought of his daughter, not just her loss, but the pure, uncomplicated joy she'd brought him. He thought of the scavenger child. Not just her fear, but the fierce determination in her eyes as she clutched her doll. He thought of Vance's hands, stained with coffee and grease, fixing a toy. He thought of Rostova, sharing a ration bar. He thought of the first fragile green shoot pushing through irradiated soil after the Jacor's first pulse. He poured it all in. The love, the loss, the hope, the despair, the bitter coffee, the shared silence, the defiant laugh in the face of oblivion. He didn't hold back the darkness. He wove it together with the light, creating a tapestry of human experience so complex, so chaotic, so alive it defied categorization. Around him, the bunker personnel followed his lead. Tears streamed down faces as they remembered lost loves. But they also smiled through the tears, remembering shared jokes, small kindnesses. They sang songs of sorrow, but the melodies held threads of hope. They broadcast their memories, their fears, their dreams, their simple, everyday moments of connection, out into the dying world, across the shattered earth, in the crumbling arcologies, in the hidden bunkers, in the irradiated ruins. Survivors heard the call. They didn't understand the science, only the desperate plea in Aris's voice, relayed through crackling speakers and flickering screens. They closed their eyes. They held their children close. They remembered sunlight on their faces. They tasted phantom strawberries. They felt the ghost of a lover's touch. They laughed, a raw, broken sound that echoed in the encroaching dark. They poured their entire, messy, contradictory souls into the global network, into the conduit that was Aris Thorn, into the humming heart of the Jacor. The device responded. The crimson light didn't fade. It transformed. It swirled with impossible colors, gold bleeding into violet, crimson merging with emerald green, deep blues shot through with streaks of blinding white. The hum became a symphony, a cacophony of human voices, laughter, sobs, whispers, songs, all woven together into a single resonant chord that vibrated through the bedrock of the planet. The Jacor wasn't just amplifying. It was translating. It was broadcasting the unfiltered, chaotic essence of humanity, not as a weapon but as a statement. A final, defiant, "We were here, and this is what it meant." The wave of energy that erupted from the Jacor wasn't a beam. It was an explosion of pure, unadulterated human experience. It washed over the Scourge Armada like a tidal wave of light and sound and feeling. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. For the Scourge, the pinpoint singularities didn't just recoil, they convulsed. The swirling vortexes of entropy flickered violently, as if struck by a physical blow. Within the sensor feeds, the twisted figures in the Scourge cities writhed, their forms dissolving and reforming in agony. The K'thar's horror had been correct. The Scourge fed on emotion, but they fed on simple high-intensity signatures. Pure fear, pure despair, the clean energy of dying stars. They were not equipped to process the chaotic, contradictory, loving complexity of the full human spectrum. It was like feeding a creature that only ate pure sugar, a meal of bitter herbs, sweet fruit, salty tears, and fiery peppers all at once. It was indigestible. It was poison. The Scourge entities shrieked. A silent, reality-rending scream of confusion and pain that registered as violent tremors on every seismograph on Earth. Their structures began to destabilize, the crystallized sorrow fracturing. The vast armada, drawn by the irresistible beacon, was now being unmade by the very feast it had come to consume. But the cost was absolute. The Jacquard, channeling the emotional output of an entire dying species, pushed far beyond its limits. The geothermal taps, already strained to breaking, finally gave way. Deep within the Earth's mantle, a chain reaction ignited. The planet groaned, a sound of tectonic plates tearing apart. The bunker lights flickered and died, replaced by the hellish multicolored glow of the Jacquard itself, now pulsing like a dying star. Core breach imminent, Vance screamed, clinging to a console as the floor bucked beneath her. Minutes, maybe seconds. Rostova grabbed Aris's arm, her face grim but resolute. It's working, Thorn. They're breaking, but we're going with them. Aris didn't pull away. He kept his hands on the Jacquard, pouring the last dregs of his own life, his memories, his love for a world that was ending, into the machine. He saw his daughter's face one last time, not in grief, but in a smile of pure, uncomplicated love. He sent that smile out into the void. A final gift, a final defiance. Good, he rasped, his voice barely audible over the planet's death throes and the Scourge's silent screams. Let them choke on it. The Jacquard's light flared one final blinding time, a supernova of human joy, sorrow, love, and rage, and then imploded, not with a bang, but with a profound, echoing silence that swallowed all sound. The Scourge Armada didn't vanish, it unraveled. The singularities collapsed in on themselves, not into nothingness, but into chaotic bursts of harmless light and dissipating energy. The entities within dissolved into motes of confused, fading resonance, unable to hold their form against the overwhelming complexity they'd ingested. The vast, hungry darkness that had blotted out the sky simply ceased to be. Stars reappeared, cold and distant, but undeniably there. On Earth, the quaking stopped. The unnatural cold lifted, replaced by the weak but real warmth of the returning sun. But the planet was broken. Continents were sundered. Oceans boiled in newly formed chasms. The atmosphere was thin, toxic. The Aegis bunker was a tomb of twisted metal and silence. Aris Thorn lay on the cracked floor, the Jacquard beside him, a cold, dead lump of gray metal. He was alive. Barely Rostova and Vance were nearby, coughing in the dust. Alive, a handful of others stirred in the wreckage. They had survived the end of the world. They stumbled out of the ruins of Geneva, into a landscape of utter desolation. The sky was clear, impossibly blue, but the land was a wasteland of ash and shattered rock. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind whistling through skeletal ruins. They were the last, perhaps the very last of humanity. Days passed. They scavenged what little they could from the ruins, their movements slow, haunted. They had won. They had destroyed the Scourge, but at the cost of their world, their future. They were ghosts on a dead planet. Then, one morning, as Ares sat on a chunk of ferrocrete staring at the empty horizon, he saw it, near the base of a shattered skyscraper, where the toxic soil met a trickle of meltwater from a fractured aquifer. A single, impossibly green shoot pushed through the gray ash. It was small, fragile, trembling in the breeze. But it was alive. He walked over, his boots crunching on the debris. He knelt, his old joints protesting. He touched the tiny leaf, feeling its delicate resilience. It wasn't a forest. It wasn't a sign of recovery. It was just one plant. Defying the impossible, Eris Thorn, the man who poured coffee on an alien superweapon, the man who broke the world to save its soul, felt a tear trace a clean path through the grime on his cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, not entirely. It was a tear of recognition, of kinship. He looked up at the clear, star-filled sky, the sky his people had fought so hard to keep. He thought of the Scourge, unmade by the very complexity they sought to consume. He thought of the K'thar watching from their safe, logical distance, who would never understand what had just happened here. They had seen humanity as chaotic, illogical, disposable. They had been right about the chaos, but they had been utterly, catastrophically wrong about the rest. Humanity wasn't just resilient. It was infectious. Its messy, contradictory, loving, defiant spirit wasn't just a survival trait. It was a fundamental force of the universe, as potent as gravity, as undeniable as light. It could break worlds. It could unmake gods of entropy. And it could sprout a single green shoot in the ashes of Armageddon. Eris Thorn didn't have coffee. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a future. But he had this tiny, impossible spark of life. He cupped his hands around it, shielding it from the wind. A silent promise whispered on the dead world's breath. We were here, and we are still here. Far above, in the silent void, the K'thar observation vessel that had lingered hidden watched the sensor feeds. They saw the Scourge dissolve. They saw the planetary cataclysm. They saw the lone human kneeling by the green chute. Overseer Vralak processed the data, the chaotic emotional resonance patterns that had shattered the Devourer of Light, the sheer, illogical persistence of the biological signature on the dead world. For the first time in 10,000 years, K'thar mind experienced something it had no category for. Not fear, not logic, not even awe. It was a quiet, profound sense of wonder. And a dawning, humbling realization. The galaxy hadn't grown weary of humanity. It had simply been waiting for humanity to show it what true strength looked like. Not in the cold fire of stars, but in the stubborn green of a single impossible leaf pushing through the ash. The gift of the void hadn't been the weapon. It had been the mirror, and in its reflection, the universe had finally seen itself.